Around 2 months ago, I had an experience at Walmart that still gives me the chills. It was a late Sunday night, and I decided to make a quick run to pick up a few things I needed for the week. I had a 12-hour shift the next morning, so I knew wouldn't have had time to do my errands. I opened up Google Maps, and there was a 24-hour Walmart only a few miles from my place, so I figured it would be a fast and easy trip. I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot around 11 p.m. The store was quiet, with just a few cars scattered around. I parked close to the entrance and walked inside, grabbing a cart. The fluorescent lights were harsh and the aisles were mostly empty, making the place feel even more eerie. I started in the grocery section, picking up some essentials. As I moved through the aisles, I noticed a man who seemed to be following me. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was just doing his own shopping. But every time I turned down a new aisle, we kept running into each other. I'd figured I'd tried to keep my distance. The man was tall, scrawny, and he wore a baseball cap with a weird-looking beard. He kept making this weird expression as if he was thinking about something. At this point, I just ignored it and continued with shopping, but I couldn't ignore the fact that he was still there, looking at me. I decided to test my theory, so I made a sudden turn into a random aisle. Sure enough, there he was again, stopping at the end of the aisle and pretending to look at something on the shelf. My heart started to pound, and I knew this wasn't just a coincidence. I quickly finished my shopping, grabbing the last few items on my list. I headed towards the self-checkout lanes, hoping to get out of there as quickly as possible. As I scanned my items, I kept glancing over my shoulder, and there he was, hovering near the entrance. What the hell did this guy want? I thought. I paid for my items and hurried towards the exit, trying to keep my cool. But as I stepped outside, I realized I would have been walking to my car alone. Knowing that this guy was following me, I pulled out my phone and pretended to make a call, hoping it would deter him. As I walked towards my car, I could hear footsteps behind me getting closer. I glanced back and saw the man walking briskly in my direction. From this point, my fight-or-flight mode had kicked in. I picked up my pace and started running as fast as I could. My key fob was broken, so I had to manually insert my key. When I got to my car, I kept fumbling with my keys. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely get the key into the lock. Just as I managed to unlock the door and get inside, the man had barely reached my car. He grabbed the handle super hard and tried opening it, but luckily I locked it just in time. I was terrified, and even though he couldn't open the door, just seeing him right there in front of me made it 10 times worse. He kept pulling so aggressively. What was I going to do at this point? I started the car and backed out of the parking space as quickly as I could. The man chased after me for a few steps, but then stopped as I sped away. I didn't stop driving until I was several miles away. My heart was still pounding in my chest. When I finally got home, I called the police and reported the incident. They took my statement and said they would check the security footage at Walmart. A few days later, they called me back and told me they had identified the man. Apparently, he was a known homeless troublemaker with a history of stalking and harassment. The police assured me they would keep an eye on him, but I couldn't shake the feeling of what he could have done to me if I was a second too late. For weeks, I was on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid he might show up again. I avoided Walmart for a long time, preferring to drive to a different store if it meant I would be safer there. That experience gave me PTSD, and I only go shopping in the daytime now. There's a reason why people don't go out super late at night. Back in 2019, I had just landed my first job as a security guard at Walmart. It seemed straightforward. You watch the cameras, patrol the store, and ensure no one was stealing. It seemed pretty easy, to be honest. The Walmart I worked at was in a quiet suburban area. During the day, it was your typical bustling store. People coming in and people coming out. But at night, it always felt completely different. The aisles were empty, the lights were dimmed, and the silence always had that weird feeling. My shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. I remember my first night vividly. I was nervous, but excited. The store manager, named Frank, gave me a quick tour and showed me the security room. It was a small, cramped space filled with monitors and equipment. Frank told me to just keep an eye on everything. It didn't seem too bad. He also mentioned how sometimes at night, previous security workers kept experiencing weird things. I shrugged it off, thinking he was just trying to scare the newbie. I settled into my chair, watching the monitors. The first few hours were pretty boring, but for the most part, pretty chill. I watched a few employees stocking shelves, a couple of night shift workers chatting, and an occasional customer wandering in for some late-night shopping. Around 2 a.m., things started to change. I noticed a man on one of the monitors. He was standing in the electronics section, staring at the wall of TVs. He was tall, with a dirty hoodie pulled over his head. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming he was just a late-night shopper. But he didn't move. He just stood there, staring. After about 10 minutes, I decided to check it out. I walked through the empty aisles, and when I reached the electronics section, the man was gone. I looked around, but there was no sign of him. I shrugged it off and just went back to the security room. As I sat back down and scanned the monitors, there he was again, in a different aisle, staring at the shelves. I got up again and made my way to where I had seen him. Once again, he was gone. This went on for the next hour. Every time I saw him on the monitors and went to go check, he just disappeared. It was like he was toying with me. It made me feel uneasy. My heart raced every time I left the security room. The store felt colder, and the silence was heavier. Around 3:30 a.m., I saw him again, this time in the toy section. I decided to be smart about it. I quietly made my way through the aisles, trying to catch him off guard. As I approached the toy section, I heard a faint humming. It was a creepy, tuneless hum. I peeked around the corner and saw him standing there with his back to me, humming and swaying slightly. I called out, "Hey, the store is closed. You need to leave." He eventually stopped humming but didn't turn around. I took a step closer, repeating myself. Suddenly, he bolted. He ran down the aisle, disappearing into the shadows. I chased after him, my heart pounding in my chest. I turned the corner, but he was gone. It was like he vanished into thin air. At this point, I was shaken. I went back to the security room and locked the door. I sat there and kept staring at the monitors, trying to calm down. I kept expecting him to appear on one of the screens, but he didn't. About 2 hours later, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the monitor showing the back storage area, I saw the man again. He was standing in the middle of the room, staring directly at the camera. His face was pale and gaunt, his eyes dark and empty. He raised his hand and waved slowly, a sinister smile spreading across his face. I froze. I didn't know what to do. My radio started to buzz and I heard Frank's voice. "Hey, rookie, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I snapped out of it and quickly told him what was happening. Frank sighed and said, "Stay there. I'll be right over." Frank arrived about 10 minutes later. We reviewed the footage, but to my horror, there was no sign of the man. Frank looked at me, his expression serious. "You're not the first to see him," he said quietly. "There's a story about this place. Years ago, a man was caught stealing and was chased into the storage area. He had a heart attack and died before anyone could help him. Some say his spirit still roams the store." I didn't know what to say at the time. Frank patted me on the back and told me to take the rest of the night off. I didn't argue. I grabbed my stuff and left the store as quickly as I could. I continued working at that Walmart for another year. I never saw the man again, but I always felt cautious during my shifts. To this day, I can't forget the look on his face or the way he waved at the camera. It was my first job, so I knew I was never going to forget this experience. Needless to say, I'm just glad to have left. It was a regular Friday night, and I was chilling on the sofa watching Avengers Endgame when my mom told me to stop by Walmart. It was around 11 p.m., and the store was pretty quiet for the most part. I didn't mind shopping late because I knew it would be less crowded. I decided to take my time and grabbed a cart. I started my usual routine, moving through the aisles at a leisurely pace. As I was picking out some cereal, I noticed a couple of guys in hoodies walking past me. They looked a bit out of place, but I didn't think much of it at the time. People wear all kinds of things at Walmart, especially late at night. I thought maybe they were just cold since it was pretty late at this time. I continued my shopping, heading towards the electronics section to look at some phone accessories. I was browsing through the chargers when I heard a commotion near the front of the store. I thought it was probably just another stupid customer making a scene. It sounded like raised voices and a bit of shouting. I ignored it at first, thinking it was just a minor argument. But then someone started yelling and told everyone to get down on the ground. The tone of their voice sent a chill down my spine. I peeked out from the aisle and saw one of the guys in the hoodie standing near the entrance. He had a handgun and held it pretty aggressively. At this point, my heart started pounding like crazy. This wasn't just a minor argument. This was serious. I ducked behind a display of DVDs, trying to stay out of sight. From my hiding spot, I could see the two men moving quickly. One was keeping watch with the gun, while the other was grabbing cash from the registers. I felt so bad for the cashiers because I knew they were so terrified for their lives. I was breathing super fast, but I tried to stay as quiet as possible. One of the shoppers must have moved or made a noise because out of nowhere, the guy with the gun turned and fired a shot into the ceiling. That shot was so loud that I could feel my eardrums vibrate. "Stay down," he shouted. "Nobody moves." I felt frozen, my mind racing with thoughts of what could happen next. I didn't dare look up, but I could hear the robbers moving around, their footsteps echoing in the quiet store. Surprisingly, what felt like an eternity lasted only a few minutes. Then, the guy with the gun started yelling at his partner. "Hurry up! We gotta go!" They must have heard the sirens in the distance. The police were on their way. The robbers grabbed what they could and bolted towards the exit. I stayed down, waiting until I was sure they were gone. Slowly, I got up and looked around. The store had been completely trashed. Shoppers were still crouched down, and I could hear lots of them crying. The employees were trying to calm people down, assuring them that help was coming. The police arrived a few minutes later, guns drawn, and quickly secured the scene. They started taking statements from everyone, trying to piece together what had happened. When they got to me, I told them everything I had seen. Luckily, I found out that no one had gotten hurt. I left the store, my legs feeling like jelly. I got into my car and just sat there for a moment. I was just trying to process what the hell had just happened. My hands were shaking and I couldn't believe how close I had come to danger. I drove home in a daze and kept replaying the events in my mind over and over. That night, I told my parents what had happened and they were just like any other parents. They were shocked and kept asking me if I was okay. However, that night, I had a really hard time trying to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept thinking about the man with the gun. I'd always hear the shots and could feel the adrenaline in my body. It's easier said than done, but when you're in a situation like that, you definitely can't just forget it easily. It's an experience I'll never forget, and it still pains me to think about where these people could be. I had been working at Walmart for about 6 months, mostly doing late-night shifts. It was usually pretty quiet, and I spent most of my time restocking shelves and organizing inventory. The routine was simple and predictable, which I liked. But one night, everything changed. It was a typical night, around 2 a.m., and I was restocking the back aisles, the ones that didn't get much foot traffic. As I was moving boxes around, I noticed something strange. There was an area where the boxes were stacked unusually high, almost like a makeshift wall. It caught my attention because it was different from the usual setup. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to take a closer look. I carefully moved a few boxes aside, and what I found left me stunned. Behind the wall of boxes was a small, hidden living space. There were blankets spread out on the floor, a few pillows, and a collection of clothes neatly folded. I even saw some non-perishable food items, a couple of water bottles, and a makeshift bed. My heart started to race. Someone had been living here, right under our noses. I looked around nervously, half expecting to see someone watching me, but the aisle was empty. I stood there for a moment, taking it all in, trying to process what I was seeing. It was like discovering a hidden world within the store. I decided to report it to my manager. I felt uneasy, not knowing who this person was or what they might do if they found out their hiding spot had been discovered. I carefully put the boxes back in place and made my way to the front of the store. My manager, Dave, was in his office. I knocked on the door and told him what I had found. He looked surprised, but also concerned. We both headed back to the aisle, and I showed him the hidden living area. Dave sighed and rubbed his temples. "We need to handle this carefully," he said. "We don't know who this person is or what they might be capable of." We decided to call the police, just to be safe. They arrived a short while later, and we showed them the hidden area. The officers searched the store, but didn't find anyone. They told us to keep an eye out, and to call them immediately if we saw anything suspicious. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about the hidden living space. I started to notice little things that I had overlooked before. A half-empty bottle of water behind a display, a blanket peeking out from behind some boxes. It was clear that this person had been living in the store for quite some time, and they were very good at staying hidden. A week later, I was restocking shelves in the same area when I heard a noise. It was faint, like a rustling sound coming from the back of the aisle. I froze, listening carefully. The noise continued, getting closer. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly moved towards the source of the sound. I turned a corner and saw him. A man, thin and disheveled, was crouched down, trying to move some boxes back into place. We locked eyes, and for a moment neither of us moved. Then he bolted, sprinting down the aisle and disappearing around a corner. I yelled for help, and a couple of my co-workers came running. We searched the store, but couldn't find him. It was like he had vanished into thin air. The police were called again, and this time they did a more thorough search of the store. They eventually found him hiding in a storage closet, curled up in a corner, looking terrified and defeated. He was taken away, and we learned that he had been living in the store for over 2 months. He had lost his job and his home and had nowhere else to go. He had created his little sanctuary in the store, surviving off whatever he could find. The whole experience left me shaken. I couldn't believe someone had been living in the store so long without anyone noticing. It made me realize how easily people can slip through the cracks and how desperation can drive someone to do unimaginable things. I still think about him sometimes, wondering what happened to him. Ever since then, I make sure to double check in between the aisles.